I'm Lee Huntsman, and it's my privilege to moderate this conversation this afternoon. But first of all, it's my privilege to welcome you all. Thank you for coming to Under the Boughs. First, tell us a little bit about how did you get into this swamp called AI? What's your professional trajectory, and what's the nature of the enterprise that you're on right now? Scott, you want to start?
Sure. I'll bookend this a little bit because this has to do with the mind, and so I've got an unusual starting point, which is as an undergraduate, I did an independent thesis program living in Nepal for 2 years, spent most of that time in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. And the short of that, that's all about the mind. How does the mind work? They have a kind of well-developed set of thoughts about that. From there, I came back, ended up in business school, and we're now talking kind of early mid-'80s, where technology and strategy were kind of really interesting intersections for me. That led me into helping co-found one of the, I think it was actually the first network of CEOs for high technology companies. And the collaboration, the value I saw out of that was just really remarkable. That led me into a career basically hopscotching across a whole set of different early stage technology companies and across some different industries that included everything from databases to automating, in essence, the McKinsey approach to presentations, a McKinsey version of PowerPoint, as it were. Also automating the thought process that McKinsey uses, both training and then an applications tool. I did a couple of stints in the music industry, one actually applying artificial intelligence to music, to sound processing, and the other, for those music fans way deep back there and who are of a certain age, I was actually CEO of a company called Internet Underground Music Archive, which was literally the first company to put music on the internet. So the short of this is I've seen a lot of changes over time. The reason I'm so excited to be at Synapse is that it's this confluence of thinking about the mind, how it works, thinking more deeply about collaboration, how that works, thinking about how technology intersects that, and underlying all of that, a deep sense of purpose. Because, as Lee was saying, they're huge challenges, it's very complex, but what a difference it can make to actually transform and change the trajectory of healthcare. And I'm a firm believer, we'll be talking about it tonight, that AI can really do it. And are there challenges? Absolutely, but it's that purpose part of it which is truly exciting.
I've only worked at 3 companies for my whole career. I actually started my career in technology. I was an intern at Microsoft between my junior and senior year in college. And I'm originally from Montreal, and I fell in love with Microsoft and fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. And after the internship, Microsoft offered me a full-time position, and I joined on full-time, literally drove out a month after graduation and joined Microsoft in 1993. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I ended up meeting, I also happen to believe that you form companies first with people and not with ideas. So my focus in figuring out what I want to do next was really identifying the people who I wanted to do it with. And so I actually met with this one guy who I had identified as a guy who I'd love to start a business with, and we sat down, and he said, "Oh, what are you interested in?" And I said, "Well, I'm interested in healthcare, renewable energy, and cosmetics." And he said, "Okay, that's interesting." And I said, "Oh, and I'd like to start a business with you." He's like, "What?" And he goes, "Well, I'm really excited about healthcare too, and I've been talking to some other guys about it, and let's all start brainstorming." And so we did. And that's what landed us on 90.6. I mean, it was just that natural and organic. Ultimately, we want families, individuals, to be healthier at a more reasonable cost. In fact, we believe that basic primary care should be available to every single person on this earth, and that it can be delivered at a tiny, tiny fraction of the cost that the current delivery mechanisms are have established.
There's all these buzzwords out there. what is AI? I mean, how do we think about it? How do we get our minds around it? Quite apart from healthcare, just, the term has been around for a long time, but I think the vast majority of us couldn't give a simple definition.
Is all kind of share my theory and take on this. What AI has been debated for decades, going back to the very beginning, as has intelligence, the meaning of the word intelligence, even applied to humans. So this is a broad area with a lot of different viewpoints. And again, granting me a little bit of literary license here, that then has morphed into all these terms, Lee, that you were mentioning, and that embody, in the case of Watson, at least I've heard, something like 30 different technologies. But then you can kind of see this expansion and these multiple threads coming out, everything from robotics, natural language processing, machine learning, automated reasoning, the realm we live in, the Synapse, my company lives in that realm. And one of the most interesting things, which I think will come out in the conversation tonight, is how these are going to, I think, interweave, interestingly, over time, and how they're going to interweave with humans. Because we think this is very much going to be a collaborative co-evolution that takes place. And it's very hard to see how that will unfold, but it's very exciting.
I mean, a computer that is able to basically process large amounts of data in order to propose or make a decision on a given difficult topic. I mean, that's what computers do. Today they call that AI, but computers have been doing that forever. And in fact, the really interesting thing to me is that the underlying models that we are still using today to do all this magical AI work are the same models that my professors were writing papers about in the early 1980s. They're the same models that I learned in the early 1990s. Stochastic modeling has been around for a long, long time. You know, you talk about Q theory. Q theory is based on stochastic modeling. This is modeling where the inputs or the potential outcomes that you're looking at, that you're needing to optimize, are not deterministic. They have probabilities associated with them. And it's where we're going to start looking, and you know, this stochastic models fit very well in healthcare, right? Because nothing is a certainty, everything is just probabilities. Well, all the models, all the modeling capabilities, the solution algorithms that were established to solve those complex models were all built back then, and they're still being used now.
Now let's take AI and apply it to healthcare. Is that where we are? Are we at an inflection point where there is the potential to bring these well-established tools into the complexity of healthcare and do it at a scale that's going to lead to real impact? Tell us, how does AI fit into healthcare?
There's a study that just came out a few weeks ago from the McKinsey Global Institute, and they looked at the potential for automation across, I think, 12 or 15 different industries, and over 2,000 tasks. And what was fascinating to me was that they looked at the task level. In other words, what number of these tasks can be automated? And what they came up with is that they said 51% of the total 2,000 tasks, again, across the industries, top to bottom, that they looked at, are subject to automation. And within healthcare, their judgment was that 36% of the tasks and the activities within healthcare can be automated. So those are big numbers. And I won't try to speak for the kind of credibility of the report and so forth, other than there was apparently a fairly rigorous methodology looked at. And you know, even if you argue that those numbers are plus or minus a little bit, those are still huge numbers with huge economics behind it. And they weren't looking out into a 2050 kind of a future. They're looking at today. What can happen if a provider has best medical thinking applied to that individual patient in a matter of seconds? That's what our mission is. That's what we're actually working on doing, because we model knowledge directly to execute it against a particular fact pattern. In this case, that's a patient profile. In the case of the patient, what if the patient is able to answer a set of very intelligent questions before they go in to see the doctor, so that they're not only educated on what's going on with them, but the doctor has an ability to start far in advance from where they are. From the payer's side, what if economics are actually attached to clinical treatments, therapies, and outcomes, so that you don't have these, again, this fragmentation of information across the board? And that's very much at the core of how we think of AI in terms of what can actually be modeled directly. And then on the research side, what's possible if you create basically a platform for doing research that allows you to share information with other researchers that has executable knowledge. And this is sort of a new concept, but that's, again, the realm where we play in, at least.
But now, instead of having tens or hundreds of cases that we can look at and inform ourselves with, we have billions. We have billions of data points, okay? And now, the data, instead of it sitting in a village, the data, like the world is flat. I mean, the data moves instantaneously around the world, and anyone who begins to build those models can access all this data as a way to inform the decisions they're making. And it's not just any doctor, it's any plan administrator, it's an insurance company, it's a self-insured employer, it's it's the medical professional who answers the phone when you call up and say something's wrong. I mean, what we're trying to do is model their behavior with a much broader set of data and much faster, because we can use computer technology to do it, in order to make the process more efficient.
How is adoption of AI, either broadly or even narrowly, going to proceed in healthcare? What gives you optimism that this industry is ready?
I personally do not believe that the slowness of AI adoption in healthcare has anything to do with the ecosystem. And I believe it from the deepest part of my heart. I think it's because of the stakes. The stakes are high. They're high. We are dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with their health. We're dealing with the lives of their loved ones in many cases, because often, there are people who are looking at care options for the person sitting next to them, not for themselves. The pressure is even higher. The stakes are high, and therefore, and I won't say that perfection is, we'll never get to perfection, but the bar we have to achieve around quality in order for us, I'd say even the people who are building the technology, to feel comfortable to deploy it commercially is higher than it's ever been with any other technology adoption.
If you show up with something that really is sort of obviously and arguably better, you start using it. I think that the history of technology adoption looks like this. Robbie, what you're talking about with the data and so forth, seeing the patterns in that, recognizing that, bringing that forward, that's one of the two flavors that kind of originated out of the Dartmouth conference back in 1956, where this all started in one sense, which is this school of probabilities and predictions, which is data-based. In other words, it's based on massive amounts of data that were gathered, just as you were saying. And that gives you a kind of form of mathematical computation that is often expressed in terms of probabilities. So, for example, it might come back with a probability that says there's a 92% chance you have this particular type of cancer, and so on and so forth. It might be able to kind of reason through all these other kinds of things. And so it produces, and this is in essence, a black box just because it's mathematical reasoning that speaks a different language than us humans do. It's not saying it's good or bad. It can be extraordinarily good, particularly at population levels. Where we play and where this other kind of style of box is, as it were, we play in the clear box world. So all of our thinking, which is nothing other than the synthesis, the collective best thinking of physicians, doctors, and providers that we work with to build these knowledge models, is explicit. It's laid out. It answers questions explicitly, like, why did you come to this conclusion? And then you can drill down further. Where does that come from? What is the research based on? And you can see explicitly why it's applied to an individual patient. We think that this kind of clear box approach can make a real difference in terms of adoption And I'm delighted to hear the reactions you guys are getting to your system. We're getting the same in terms of ours. They're saying, please build this faster. We want to use it. If clinical actions can have an economic lens that is just built into what those clinical actions are, that satisfying everyone concerned with the economics in the ecosystem, that can go a long way to making the system work better and causing people to think in terms of outcomes and cost, and therefore in terms of value.
Do you think we're going to see AI's biggest impact in the near term by partnering with providers or by disrupting the business models?
I'm not a big believer in disruption. I think disruption implies that there are winners and there are losers, and I do not believe that that's the way it needs to happen, should happen, or will happen in the healthcare space. If you look at the major elements of the ecosystem, and I 100% agree with Scott that while I think the ecosystem is strong and will be retained. When I say ecosystem, the different players and their relationships to each other. I totally agree with Scott that the ecosystem is not working as well as it needs to work, clearly. I mean, healthcare in the United States is completely messed up. I do not believe that it is because the ecosystem needs to be disrupted. In other words, that one of these players in the ecosystem needs to be a loser while other members of the ecosystem or new additions into the ecosystem, like technologists, investors in technology companies, or patients, or whatever, are the winners. You need the providers, you need the payer who is going to attempt to keep everyone honest and ensure that prices are driving down. And of course, you need the insurer. You know, for individuals who don't work at companies, it's an insurance company. But for the vast majority of people who are, who are working for companies who are self-insured, it's actually the company. So I believe that AI will help, can help every single element of this ecosystem. Every one of those groups that I just described will be assisted by AI. There's no question about it. AI is already helping the payers with the way they analyze claims. Okay? It's already happening. Providers are starting to use AI to try to make their practices more efficient. To me, the concept of disruption means revolution. It implies revolution. I mean, basically, Uber is always the greatest example. It happens to be one of the most impactful changes that's happened right in front of our eyes. It was a revolution. I mean, like, we went from here to here overnight, bang, and all of a sudden, like, the taxi drivers don't know what to do with their medallions. It was a revolution, hardly evolutionary. I happen to believe that the changes that will happen in healthcare need to be evolutionary.
A couple different things come to my mind. One is the question of time horizon. I think Bill Gates, and maybe slightly off with the years here, said something like, we overestimate what we can do in 2 years, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. I think that's absolutely true for the collision of AI into the healthcare system. I think, expectation at a 1 or 2 year level are, in terms of a system level, ecosystem level, are just, not there. Buckminster Fuller said, if you're trying to change someone's thinking, forget about it. It's just really, really hard to do. But if you can give them a new tool through which the use of causes them to change their thinking, there you've got something, because that really does change something fundamental, and it sustains over time. And I think that's how this evolution is going to take place. I think these new forms of intelligence are going to start to enter in different ways. Your company's one example, ours is another. It's going to be fascinating to see how they kind of incrementally, but that doesn't mean in terms of the scope of the impact. I think it's going to be huge impacts in a lot of areas. But to reorchestrate the entire ecosystem, I agree with you, Robbie, the fundamental roles that the different players are playing, I don't see that as changing fundamentally. But I think there's really going to be a new way that is all orchestrated and related. And again, I think a lot of it will be driven by these different flavors of AI as they start to take hold out there. And a big shift will be, as you questioned earlier, Lee, about the shift to value orientation, where the costs and the outcomes will be connected. The insight into why this particular diagnosis was reached will be very clear, will be laid out explicitly. There'll be tons of data behind it at the population level. We'll have some logic at the individual patient level. And this will start to spread, and I absolutely agree with your other comment, Robbie, that this will be a global impact. And I've certainly heard several comments out of leaders in the global health space that the old idea, the old conception that there's sort of, first country health systems and then developing country health systems is going to start to blur and hopefully rapidly start to fade away. It will take some time, just with the dispersal of knowledge of how, smart, how much intelligence is going to be delivered onto your smartphone. And smartphones, cell towers were a huge leap forward over landline-based systems, and I think the same kind of thing can actually take place in the healthcare system.
Well, I would encourage you all to continually pay attention to the human dimensions of adoption. It's a really big deal. But there are some interesting experiments. One local here, run by David Flem University, is called the SCOPE project, which is an attempt to get all the surgeons in the state of Washington to come together and agree on what they're going to work on together to improve the outcomes from surgery. And that SCOPE project has been phenomenally successful at getting them to agree on checklists, pre-surgical nutrition, other experiments. So there is another dimension in adoption, which is collegial and professional expectations and assistance. And so this is a very, very human enterprise, as you know, healthcare, with all of us wild participants. So next question, Ed.
We have a question from our online chat function.
Oh, great.
Okay. What are some of the boldest examples of using AI in healthcare in the country so far?
Yes, someone mentioned automated EKG interpretations. That's certainly one. There's a lot of work that's being done, and this is one of the Watson areas. I know that their partnership with Sloan Kettering produced an oncology advisor system. And from what I've read, and I'm not deeply schooled in this speaks to the breadth of the AI world, that machines are, in fact, better than humans in recognizing what's going on with the visual image. And I think that's a real area of success.
Kind of bold makes it sound like it's like truly cutting edge. I think there's a bunch of places in healthcare where AI is being very successfully used. And the imaging example is likely the best one. It's being used very broadly. I mean, mammograms are being initially reviewed by computer systems. And it happens instantaneously, and when the image comes up in front of the radiologist, there's little red boxes that are being, drawn around the areas of the image that the doctor needs to apply special attention to. I mean, that's an application of AI, and there's no question that this technology it's certainly dramatically increasing the efficiency of these radiologists, because there's a lot of these mammograms happening. And number two, and I haven't seen research on this, but I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say, I'm gonna bet that in time, that AI will help those physicians see things that they might not have otherwise seen, and therefore save lives. So the whole realm of clinical decision support, which I view as a very evolutionary approach, but still an important application of AI, where it's not about replacing the doctor, it's not about full and complete automation. It's about enabling deep analysis to help doctors be more efficient and therefore deliver higher qualities of care at the same or a lesser price.